Today, we will be talking about the institutions that restricted the full social and economic equality of Black Americans prior to and following the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Here to provide some context in the 1960s is Gene Rook, grandfather of Timothy Riley.
Well, the black culture was one of responsibility. You had a family, you had a black family, a male and a female and children, and somebody that the black children could look up to as being responsible, that would work and provide, and it went from there to single mothers raising black children on welfare. I think that was a major thing that came out of that was destructive.
So prior to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, private sector discrimination limited African American economic growth. While the act did ban this discrimination and open up public sector economic opportunities, institutional racism still prevented blacks from flourishing economically. Before the Civil Rights Act, black people struggled with legally segregated schools, while following the act, blacks were segregated in practice from proper schools due to lower economic status in segregated cities. Also, the Civil Rights Act provoked a shift in African American ideology from integration and equality to a conflict over black separatism and identity. While the Civil Rights Act did not undo the massive institutional racism that prevented blacks from rising to economic parity, it shifted the economic problems from blatant public sector segregation to a legally integrated society. As public areas integrated, the government intervened in hopes of restoring blacks to compete economically. To an extent, the federal government succeeded as the number of black families making $50,000 or more per year increased fourfold. However, stagnation prevented the restoration from continuing. Two major problems impeded blacks from escaping poverty: the large dependence on government jobs and the rising single motherhood rate in black communities. Through the Great Migration between the 1920s and 1960s, a large portion of the black population moved to urban centers in the north. There, blacks depended on government jobs largely because of discrimination in the private sector, which the government could not effectively prevent. Many of those who made the journey to the north ended up unemployed or impoverished as they tried to crowd into the inadequate housing conditions. This gave rise to the rising single motherhood rate, the number one indicator of poverty in America, which largely resulted from desperation as a result of poverty. Black mothers knew that they could receive welfare if they divorced their husbands, and because many black men could not find jobs in the private sector, parents split in order to receive the welfare. This incentivized single motherhood led to the rate skyrocketing to the point that it surpassed black single motherhood during slavery. With no father figures to raise children by income, the once intact black family unit deteriorated as children became involved in crime and unmotivated in school, and is currently in recovery today. Inside the civil rights movement itself, the act marked a shift in ideological patterns, as it set up the integration of its MLK wing for a decline to the black separatist wing that championed black identity. Prior to the civil rights movement, the movement for civil rights was largely for the purpose of integration of blacks into society. At this time, restaurants, theaters, buses, and schools were all segregated, and Martin Luther King Jr. was the leading figure of the civil rights movement, using nonviolent protest and boycotting in order to gain his ends. He hoped that if he televised the brutality and immorality of racism, he could appeal to the Northern Right's sympathy and morality. He believed that through integration, racism would slowly decline and die away as blacks and whites worked and lived in society side by side. However, integration was not the end of racial equality for even MLK. As MLK said, the desegregation of public facilities costs nothing. MLK explains that desegregation of public facilities solely required legislation, while private sector discrimination could continue even after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in practice often, as well as institutional racism and individual acts of racism. For instance, the case of Freedom Summer, in which two black men and a Jewish man were killed by the KKK while trying to register to vote, led to the black community questioning the effectiveness of nonviolence. Similarly, at the Democratic National Convention, Lyndon B. Johnson told black Democrats to stay out because he feared that he would not win white Southern Democrats. Because of this, blacks became disenfranchised, rejecting the idea of assimilation, and rioting in response throughout 1967 to 1975. Specifically, blacks rejected the liberal idea of blacks as white men in black skin, feeling that their cultural identity had been undermined. Furthermore, black civil rights leaders had no real way of fighting against issues such as police brutality and inadequate housing. As a result, movements such as the SNCC now led by Stokely Carmichael after the death of Malcolm X, which previously promoted nonviolence and integration, were frustrated with the slow progress of achieving racial equality and lost faith in white liberals. These movements promoted black power, black separatism, as well as the idea of institutionalized racism, which was that legislation may have not been overly racist, or the existing structures may not have been overly racist of the economy or social classes, but that laws or these structures had disparate impacts, meaning that a specific group could still be affected by it at large. For instance, those who worked in lower class jobs could not receive Social Security, and most of these people in lower class jobs were black. As integration occurred and progress slowed, black civil rights leaders felt that black leadership and self-reliance was the only way to end segregation and racism as an institution. A lack of access to quality education, an underlying obstacle of black equality, was characterized by segregated schools before the Civil Rights Act and by de facto segregated primary schools along with affirmative action programs after the Civil Rights Act. The struggle to remove race from the equation of schooling was brought to the forefront as a result of Brown v. Board of Education, in which the Supreme Court outlawed explicit segregation of school systems based on race. However, this ruling was somewhat ignored when colleges and universities used affirmative action to set aside room for colored applicants in hopes of correcting the mistakes of the past. Following the Supreme Court's decision in the Regents of the University of California versus Bakke, race became a factor in the application process rather than a quota that had to be met by universities nationwide. Despite all the progress made on the federal level, however, public schools throughout the 70s and 60s continued to practically segregate student populations with the isolation of neighborhoods by race, as evidenced by white flight and public busing restrictions.